Welcome to our proposed changes for fishing and watercraft regulations for 2026. For starters, the timeline for these changes is that we're in a public comment period. It started in April and goes through 5 p.m. on June 10th. And public comments are a really important part of the process of regulation changes. It's what the Game and Fish Commission, who's the decision-making body, uses alongside the recommendations from the department to determine what regulations to approve. And they'll be convening and discussing these proposed changes at their July meeting. It's scheduled for July 15th and 16th, and that's currently scheduled to be held in Evanston, Wyoming. The changes we're talking about, if implemented by the commission and signed by the governor's office, would become effective January 1st of 2026. And as Janet mentioned in the introduction, there's several ways of actually getting us a comment. The one that's probably the easiest is to send us an electronic comment. And I believe Renee is going to post a link in the chat of how you can find your way to those electronic comments for Chapter 46 and Chapter 22. You can also go to our website, click on regulations, or click on public involvement, and you can find your way to that link as well to provide an official public comment. You can also mail or hand deliver to our Game and Fish Regional Office in Casper if you prefer. And of course, you're always welcome to attend a Wyoming Game and Fish Commission meeting. Again, for these particular chapters we're covering today, that'll happen in Evanston in July. Official comments are a really important part of the process, both either support or opposition to the proposed changes. It's really one of the key currencies the commission has in order to determine whether changes should or should not be implemented. And we provide every comment that comes in to the Game and Fish Commissioners, and they read those in preparation for making their determinations. Before we get going, I think it's useful to think about the regulatory process that we're involved with at Game and Fish. And it really revolves around sort of these three spheres. There's biological data that we're engaged in collecting on a routine basis. We do a lot of fish population sampling, a lot of surveys and research. There's the social piece of regulations, which is sort of what anglers are experiencing, what they would like to see in their fisheries. We've been more and more relying on social data in the form of surveys. And then there's this political sphere that we don't think about very much, but legislative bodies at times direct agencies to engage in rulemaking. And the governor's office, as the head of the executive branch, is the ultimate authority in setting regulations within state government. And so what we're talking about today is regulatory changes that try to take into account these multiple spheres of data. So without further ado, I'm going to talk about Chapter 46, which is the fishing regulations portion of Game and Fish regulation first. Game and Fish regulations are organized into chapters. The 46th chapter happens to be fishing regulations, and each of the chapters are further subdivided into sections. And I'm going to be going through each of these chapters sort of section by section. So if you happen to have a paper copy of the chapter and you want to follow along either with the presentation today or as you're watching the recording, you can expect to sort of go front to back in that process. There are sections in Chapter 46 where we're not really making any substantive changes or proposing any for 2026. We'll be skipping over those, and so we'll just be hitting on the areas that there are substantive changes. I'll be identifying what those proposed changes are, and then I'll have a slide that gives a brief rationale or reason for the proposed changes. And as Jan mentioned, we're going to take questions at the end of each of these chapters. And I'll warn you that most of the changes that we're talking about today are in this Chapter 46 fishing regulations. And so I'll be talking for a fair amount of time before we get to the question and answer period. But go ahead and enter your questions in the chat as we proceed, and we'll get to those when we get to the end of Chapter 46. So for fishing regulation changes that we're proposing for 2026, we really started delving into ideas for needed changes back in 2024 and early in this calendar year. And part of that process was some email-based angler surveys in our Laramie, Casper, Cody, and Jackson regions. So some of you watching this may have gotten one of those and participated. We'll be talking a little bit about some of the results from those and how they support the proposals that we're offering today. We also held scoping meetings to obtain some input prior to this formal rulemaking process. Those happened in Laramie, Rawlins, Casper, Cody, and Jackson earlier this year. And now we're into this formal rulemaking process. And one thing to note, once we enter this formal rulemaking process, we're really looking for feedback on the regulations that are proposed. We can tweak those proposals, we can move forward with them, or we can not move forward with them. But we're really not in a position, once we reach this part of the process, to entertain entirely new or novel ideas, since those would be making rules or regulations that the rest of the public hadn't had the time or opportunity to hear and give feedback on. So with that, I'm going to go right into the proposed changes, and we're going to start with Section 2, which is the definitions and methods portion of Chapter 46. And we're proposing a new definition for pegged attractors. This definition essentially replaces in regulation what we currently define as a trout bead. But pegged attractors will mean any bead, yarn, rubber strand, molded plastic, or other non-edible material fixed or pegged on a line or leader above a bare hook or artificial fly. And in the next slide, I'll show you a couple photos to orient you to what we're talking about. Pegged attractors, like trout beads as defined currently, that are fixed or pegged within 2 inches of the eye of a bare hook or artificial fly would be considered an artificial lure. And fishing with one of these pegged attractors that is more than 2 inches from the eye of a bare hook or artificial fly would be considered snagging and be prohibited. So all of this is very similar to the current trout bead regulations. The difference is that we're really expanding the definition of what this particular fishing technique includes beyond just things that mimic trout beads or trout eggs, excuse me. And because there can be some confusion about floating strike indicators and whether they meet the definition of a pegged attractor or not, we're going to call out in regulation that those are explicitly not considered pegged attractors. So pegged attractors simplistically look like this. The trout bead is the classic example here. It is a bead that's sort of fixed on a line. You got 2 inches of line here, and then a bare hook or an artificial fly. And more folks have began to use this pegged attractor technique with different novel materials, such as this squirmy worm type material that, again, pegged on a line. And the idea with this technique is that the fish takes the attractor, and the attractor is actually pulled from the fish's mouth, and the hook is embedded on the outside of the fish's mouth. So one of the reasons that we're concerned about pegged attractors and feel the need to define those in regulation and regulate those in certain stretches of water is that this hooking on the outside of the mouth leads to a much higher probability of severe injury to the fish itself. And in some of our most popular and heavily utilized catch and release fisheries on the North Platte River, we're starting to see an alarming percentage of fish with these severe injuries, and a belief that we're actually suppressing fish populations in some cases due to the number of fish being severely injured. Continuing in section 2, we're proposing a new definition for single point barbless hook. That definition would be that a single point barbless hook means a hook with a single sharpened point, either manufactured without barbs or having the barb removed or flattened against the shank. Double or treble hooks with all but one point removed would be considered single point barbless hooks. Many of y'all who are anglers are probably familiar with these. We have, a traditional multi-point treble hook. Here are a single point hook with a single point. And then we have barbed and barbless hooks. And when we're talking about barbed hooks, we're talking about this barb here closest to the point of the hook. Sometimes on bait holder hooks, you'll have some accessory barbs up near the eye, and we're not concerned nor talking about those in this single point barbless hook definition. A little bit more clarification on this. As the regulation suggests, if you have devices that have treble hooks, you can clip off 2 of those hooks to be in alignment with the single barbless hook regulation. You can have a lure that has multiple single point barbless hooks, such as this artificial lure shown in the center here. And again, that doesn't matter if the hook is manufactured barbless or barbed. A simple file or a pair of hemostats can flatten a barb and make it a barbless hook. So the reason to begin defining single point barbless hooks in fishing regulations in Wyoming, as many are aware, they're easier and faster to remove, so it's a lot less handling of fish in catch and release fisheries. There's a lower probability of injury and deformity, again, something that we're becoming more and more concerned with in the highest use North Platte River catch and release fisheries. So that's all of the changes in definitions and methods. So now the rest of the presentation will go area by area as Chapter 46 is laid out. And Area 1 is our Snake River drainage, and we have a couple of proposed changes in Area 1. In Section 17 of Chapter 46, the Snake River, 150 feet below Jackson Dam, downstream to a gauging station 1,000 feet below the dam. We're proposing a new trout krill limit. The krill limit would be 6 trout per day or in possession, and no more of 3 of those could be cutthroat trout, and no more than one of those cutthroat trout could exceed 12 inches. This is a real short stretch of river. If you've been to the Tetons and to Jackson Lake, you've probably driven right across the dam on this Teton Park Road. The first 150 feet below the dam is closed by the Bureau of Reclamation. But from that point downstream to a gauging station 1,000 feet downstream, which is where this red arrow is on the image, is the portion of the river that we're proposing this altered krill limit for. So the rationale for this change, we wanted to provide some additional harvest opportunity for brown trout that are commonly found here near the dam. And this is the most popular location for the public that are using bait to catch fish and to harvest fish on the Snake River. And so there's an opportunity there. We'd like to encourage folks that are interested in harvest to focus their efforts here and to harvest some additional brown trout. Additionally, in Area 1, in Section 20, there's currently a closure on Jackson Lake to all fishing. The closure is currently in place from October 1st to October 31st, and we're proposing to remove that closure altogether. The rationale for this change is this is a really old closure. It's been around for about 75 years. It was put in place to protect lake trout during their fall spawning. And this closure began really during a period when most anglers were harvesting their catch. And we were just in the process of establishing lake trout in the lake at that point in time. Lake trout are now very much established in Jackson Lake. And our survey suggests that about 50% of anglers are now engaged in simply catch and release of lake trout. And less than 2% of the lake trout that are harvested are these sort of spawning sized fish that are greater than 24 inches. The reality is that most lake trout die of natural causes in Jackson Lake, as opposed to those being harvested by anglers. And we believe that by keeping the lake open, we're going to provide increased opportunity with really no subsequent consequences to the lake trout population in Jackson Lake. So that's the proposed change. And some data that we collected that led us to this proposal. In January, we conducted an email-based survey. We had 469 respondents, and the vast majority of those people told us that we should not keep this closure in place, that they were much more open to a change in regulation that allowed more fishing on Jackson Lake. All right, I'm going to switch now and talk about Area 2, so regulations that would pertain to waters in the Bighorn and Wind River drainage. So in Section 22 of Chapter 46, we have regulations on Buffalo Bill Reservoir near Cody. We're proposing a new trout krill limit and removal of an existing length restriction. The proposed new krill limit would be the krill limit on trout shall be 6 per day or in possession, with no more than 2 cutthroat rainbow or their hybrids in those 6 fish in the krill. The rationale for this change, we're going to eliminate the need for difficult trout species identification. Current regulation requires identification of cutthroat trout. This new regulation also eliminates the need for extra handling required to measure trout. The current limit requires only 1 fish over 18 inches in the trout category, and it turns out a lot of fish in this system are pretty close to that, and so a lot of fish currently getting measured that would no longer need to be measured by anglers. And probably most importantly, we've done a lot of work the last couple of years at trying to understand the size of the trout population in Buffalo Bill and the North Fork Shoshone, the movements of those fish, where harvest is, and how much harvest is. And we believe this new krill limit in combination with one on the North Fork, which I'll show you in a minute, are really sustainable based on the current amount of fishing pressure in the system. So now on the North Fork of the Shoshone, and this section 22 is the section of the river from Newton Creek downstream to Gibbs Bridge. I'll show you a map of those 2 points here shortly. We're proposing to change the date of the existing spawning closure. Currently, the river in this section is closed to fishing from April 1st to June 30th, and we're proposing to allow 2 additional weeks of fishing on the river in April and having the closure from April 15th to June 30th. Gibbs Bridge is an important landmark for the North Fork Shoshone and Buffalo Bill. It exists right as the river transitions to the reservoir. And it's this arrow here close to Buffalo Bill Reservoir, this red arrow. And Newton Creek is many miles upstream on the Shoshone Forest near a campground and picnic area. So this section of the river is the one that's has the closure currently from April 1st to June 30th that we're proposing to remain open for an additional 2 weeks in April under this proposed reg change. So the rationale for this change in the closure date, again, allowing 2 additional weeks of opportunity, and again, combined with the creel limit changes that we're proposing, we believe this continues to provide for a sustainable level of harvest based on the current fishing pressure in the system. So continuing on the North Fork of the Shoshone River, this time the drainage the entire drainage upstream of Gibbs Bridge. We're proposing a new trout creel limit and the removal of length restrictions. The new proposal is to have a creel limit on trout that is simply 2 per day in possession, no species differentiation, no length restrictions. And we're also proposing to designate walleye in this stretch of the river as non-game fish and to be killed immediately upon capture. The rationale for these changes, again, eliminating the need for difficult species identification, eliminating extra handling associated with measuring fish associated with a length restriction. And they believe that this provides a sustainable level of harvest system-wide with this package of changes on the North Fork Shoshone and Buffalo Bill. And finally, at times, Buffalo Bill pushes up underneath Gibbs Bridge, and there's reservoir habitat above the bridge that in current regulations is the North Fork Shoshone River. And so the change in walleye creel limits there is to have anglers who capture walleye in this section to help us remove these illegally introduced fish from the system through the non-game fish designation. We conducted a survey of anglers in the greater Cody region. We had 654 email respondents. We asked them if they supported this proposed set of regulatory changes, and we had more support than we did opposition for this set of proposed changes. All right, that's all for Area 2. We don't have any proposed changes in Area 3, so we're going to skip right to Area 4, which is our Green River drainage. We have a proposed change to Flume Creek. This is a small tributary stream to the Green below Fontenelle Reservoir, and we're proposing to remove a calendar year fishing closure. So Flume Creek is currently closed to all fishing year-round, and we're proposing to open that stream. The reason for this is that the original regulation was intended to protect spawning kokanee salmon for a department egg collection. However, the spawning runs of kokanee were never adequate, and so egg collection has been abandoned here. And so opening this stream to fishing will provide an additional bit of opportunity for those who might want to fish Flume Creek. So that was it for Area 4. And so now Area 5, our North Platte drainage. We have a host of changes proposed for the North Platte drainage. The first one is in Section 32 of Chapter 46. This would be a section for Diamond Lake. We're proposing a trout new trout krill limit and length restriction. Currently, Diamond Lake is managed under the statewide krill limits, and we're proposing to change that to a krill limit of 3 trout per day are in possession, with no more than one of those trout exceeding 20 inches. And the reason for this, we've heard a lot from the public in the last 5 to 10 years as Diamond Lake has really come back, and there's a public desire for an opportunity to catch more large trout at Diamond Lake. And done some surveys in the southeast Wyoming and found that anglers are by and large in support of a reduced catch for the opportunity of catching more large trout at Diamond Lake. Moving on, Section 32, the North Platte drainage from Colorado state line to Dave Johnson Dam. So this is a big chunk of the North Platte River as it comes in from Colorado and all the way down to near Glen Rock at the Dave Johnston Power Plant Dam. This includes Seminole, Pathfinder, Alcova, Gray Reef, and Cortez reservoirs. We're proposing a new walleye krill limit. The krill limit on walleye would be 12 per day or in possession. However, no more than 6 of those walleye could exceed 14 inches. In addition to this proposed krill limit change, we're also proposing this language which would allow anglers, once they're off the water and done fishing for the day, to process and fillet those fish and for transportation and storage, but require anglers to keep those intact so that a warden could determine if those fish were or were not 14 inches in length while still fishing on the water. So the rationale for this, again, this includes all these upper reservoirs. The rationale or the reason for the change, we really want to provide opportunity for anglers to have increased harvest of what we believe are really abundant small walleye population, small body-sized walleye in these waters. There's really an overabundance of these small walleye, and it's limiting growth and the desired fish size. These are really cold reservoirs, and we really have essentially what amounts to stunted walleye, and we believe increased harvest of these small fish is both a benefit for anglers that are interested in additional harvest, and also will do nothing but help out these walleye populations. And again, we want to allow anglers to be able to fillet walleye when they're off the water and done fishing for the day. Moving on, the North Platte River. This is the Miracle Mile stretch, which is from Cortez Dam downstream to Pathfinder Reservoir. We're proposing a new gear restriction. So this goes back to the definitions we started with, and we're proposing that on the Miracle Mile, fishing would be permitted by the use of single point barbless hooks only. For those who may not be too familiar, Cortez Dam is a small reservoir that exists in this canyon below Seminole, and the Miracle Mile extends from Cortez Dam downstream to the waters of Pathfinder Reservoir and is designated by these 2 red arrows on the map. So the reason for this gear restriction on the Miracle Mile, we're really concerned that we're starting to see higher and higher rates of severely injured fish in this heavily utilized catch and release section of river, and starting to see indications that those injured fish are not living to spawn, and beginning to see a suppressed population as we're losing these fish to these injuries. One thing to note is that this single point barbless hook regulation on the Miracle Mile isn't an exclusion of artificial lures and bait. Those would still be allowed. You would just need to put those on single point barbless hooks. And importantly, a recent survey found that 25% of our trout in this section had severe to massive injuries and corresponding reduced body condition. And so, to give you some visual of what we're seeing and what we're concerned about, is number 3 here and number 4 in this slide. 25% of the fish in the Miracle Mile currently have an injury on this 3 or 4 scale. And so this change to single point barbless hooks, we are hoping will begin to reverse this troubling trend. All right, we're going to continue to move downstream on the North Platte River, and the next section of the river that we have a proposed change on is often referred to as the Cardwell Reach. This is the river that is 0.8 tenths of a mile downstream from Pathfinder Dam, downstream to Alcova Reservoir. So Pathfinder out to Alcova, with the exception of this 0.8 tenths of a river mile that's immediately below Pathfinder Dam. We're proposing a new gear restriction here on the Cardwell Reach. Currently, fishing is already limited to artificial flies and lures only. We are proposing to add single point barbless hook to that, and so fishing would be permitted only by single point barbless hook, artificial flies and lures only. And we're also proposing to prohibit the use of peg detractors here in this Cardwell Reach of the North Platte. The Cardwell Reach, for those unfamiliar, it's this quite small stretch. Again, there's a vehicle road bridge where this upstream arrow is closest to Pathfinder Reservoir, and from there downstream through Fremont Canyon to the headwaters of Alcova Reservoir is the section of the river where this particular regulation would apply. So the rationale for this change on the Cardwell Reach, similar to the Miracle Mile, we're concerned about these severely injured fish. And in this stretch, recent surveys suggest that about 19% of the trout have one of those severe to massive injuries that I showed on that scale. Okay, we got 2 more sections of the North Platte we're going to talk about. The next section is locally referred to as the Afterbay. So this is the North Platte River from Alcova Dam to Gray Reef Reservoir. We're proposing a new gear restriction. We're proposing that fishing be permitted by the use of single point barbless hooks only. So the Afterbay we're proposing would have the same regulation and gear restriction as the Miracle Mile. The Afterbay section is kind of wraps around here near the town of Alcova. So on the bottom of the screen here, we have Alcova Dam and then Gray Reef Reservoir on the upper right of the image. The rationale for these changes, similar to the sections upstream that we've already discussed. In the Afterbay section, we're seeing, again, about a quarter of the trout in this section with severe massive injuries. And we believe that the use of single point barbless hooks and a little bit gentler treatment of those fish that are being caught and released multiple times is going to be beneficial to this fish population. All right, the final stretch of the North Platte River we have a proposed regulatory change on is the Gray Reef section. Now, currently, the Gray Reef section of the North Platte River extends from Gray Reef Dam downstream to our Lusby public fishing area. We're actually proposing to extend this regulated section all the way to the Wyoming Highway 220 bridge, often called Government Bridge. We're proposing new gear restrictions here. Fishing would be permitted by the use of single point barbless hook, artificial flies, and lures only. Similar to the Carvel Reach, it's already artificial flies and lures only, but we're proposing to add the single point barbless hook to that. And again, just like the Cardwell Reach, we're proposing to prohibit the use of peg detractors on this stretch of the North Platte River. So Gray Reef is a fairly long stretch. It extends from the base here of Gray Reef Reservoir Dam downstream. The Lusby Public Fishing Area is somewhere near this little pink icon on the map, and we're proposing this section extend all the way down to the Highway 220 bridge in this proposed regulatory change. So the rationale for this changes sounds like a little bit of a broken record here, but essentially we have a high catch and release use area of the North Platte, and we're seeing a lot of severe to massively injured fish in this section of river. Staying in this section of river, we also have some proposed modifications and additions to spawning closures. Currently, the portion of the Gray Reef section between the closed area signs at the gauge cable, which is 700 yards downstream of Gray Reef Dam, or excuse me, to 700 yards downstream on the Gray Reef Dam is closed to fishing. It's currently closed from April 1st through May 1st, and we're proposing to keep that closed an additional 2 weeks and closing it from April 1st through May 15th. In addition to that closure, we're proposing to add another section of closure, a 1.2 mile section of the river between a tributary on river right called Ledge Creek and downstream to a tributary on river left called S Gulch. We're proposing to have it also closed April 1st to May 15th. Ledge Creek and S Gulch are in this stretch of the river where River Right was in recent years acquired by the Bureau of Land Management in their Marton Ranch acquisition. And this stretch of river has a high density of spawning rainbow trout in the April-May timeframe. So the rationale for these spawning closures, we believe it's important to protect these actively spawning rainbow trout and their redds or the nests where they lay their eggs. And really this new wading access that came about through this BLM acquisition to this Ledge Creek spawning area really threatens to negatively influence rainbow trout reproduction. Just too many people potentially wading and fishing on top of these spawning fish. We believe that it's prudent to close this section of the river. And so I did a lot of talking, but that is the proposed changes to Chapter 46 for 2026.
Thank you, Mark. If you could unshare your screen, that would be fantastic. If you want to find how to put comments in, you need to go to the Wyoming Game and Fish Department webpage. There will be a tab across the top that says Get Involved. If you click on Get Involved, down below it, there will be something called Public Meetings. And under Public Meetings, we'll have all of the different chapters that are open right now. And we do have several different chapters that are open. So again, tonight we're talking about Chapter 22, which is Watercraft regulation, and Chapter 46, which is our fishing regulations. So you can go to either of those, and Renee has dropped those links into the chat box. But those links then will get you to submit online. You can also download those, you can print them and download them and send them directly in if you would rather use snail mail. If none of that happens to work, you can also just write your comment out and send it to the Game and Fish the Game and Fish office in Casper, which is at 3030 Energy Lane. And just as a reminder, these comments are open, both chapters 22 and 46, until 5 o'clock. So 5 p.m. on Thursday, June 10th, 2025. And they will be presented to the Wyoming Game and Fish Commission at the July meeting, which is July 15th and 16th. And we can start on chapter 22 watercraft regulations.
Chapter 22 is our game and fish watercraft regulations. And I promise this one will be shorter than the fishing regulations. We do have some proposed changes, and again, these would go into effect after commission approval and governor's signature and January 1st of 2026. So again, chapters are broken into sections. In section 9 is the portion of watercraft regulations that designate what waters upon which personal watercraft are restricted or prohibited. And we are proposing to add 3 lakes to waters where personal watercraft would be prohibited. This is Torrey, Ring, and Trail Lakes. They're near Dubois, Wyoming. Pretty small waters. Dubois on this map would be off to the north and west by a few miles. These are glacial moraine lakes that are all real close together and real small bodies of water with small primitive boat ramps. So the reason to add these lakes to waters that are prohibited for the use of personal watercraft, these are really small lakes, as I've mentioned. They're currently largely used for non-motorized watercraft and really small motorized vessels. And the use of personal watercraft creates a real safety concern with the existing boaters. And so we're proposing to prohibit all personal watercraft from these 3 water bodies. So also in section 9 is a list of waters on which the operation of watercraft with internal combustion engines is prohibited. We're proposing to remove 2 waters from this prohibited list. Those waters are Little Soda Lake near Pinedale and Naughton Plant Pond near Kemmerer. The reason that we're proposing to remove these prohibitions on internal combustion motors is that both of these waters no longer have water quality that are conducive for us managing fish and fishing. And so there's no longer possible conflicts with anglers related to the use of internal combustion motors. So in section 9, there's also a list of waters on which the operation of any type of watercraft is prohibited. And we're proposing to add 2 waters to this list where no watercraft would be allowed. Those waters are Buffalo Wetland Ponds near Buffalo and the Miracle Mile portion of the North Platte River, that being from Cordes Dam downstream to the Seminole Road Bridge. Little orientation, again, the Miracle Mile extends from the base of Cordes Dam to Pathfinder Reservoir, and nearly in the middle is the one vehicle road bridge on Seminole Road. And the proposal is to prohibit all watercraft use in this upstream section, which happens to be towards the bottom of the map, from Cordes Dam to Seminole Road Bridge would be no longer available for watercraft use. The rationale for these changes, Buffalo Wetland Ponds, it's essentially already prohibited by Buffalo City Ordinance, and so we're making a change to Chapter 22 watercraft regulations to be consistent with the city's desires there. And on the Miracle Mile from Cordes Dam to the Seminole Road Bridge, the change to prohibiting the use of watercraft on this stretch stems from many, many years of public feedback from anglers desiring a portion of the Miracle Mile where wading anglers can be free of interference with conflict with floaters The number of floating watercraft on this stretch of the river is really exploded, and we've heard a lot of feedback from anglers who aren't in those boats that they'd really like to have a stretch of the Miracle Mile where they didn't have to interact and compete with floating anglers. And so that's it. That's the extent of the proposed changes to Chapter 22.
As a reminder, these both chapters 22, which is watercraft, and 46, which is the fishing regulations, are open through 5 o'clock on Thursday, June 10th. So we still have about 3 weeks left that you can get comments in. These will be shared with not only the Game and Fish Commission, but also with each of the supervisors and biologists across the state so that they can see what everyone is thinking about their proposed changes to the fishing regulations. And just as a reminder, it is very great to note that we've had so much interaction and comments on these regulations. It's very rare that Fish Division does make changes to the regulations. And so it's pretty important when they do, and they are pretty passionate about it. So thank you guys, everybody, for attending and listening to Mark give a fantastic presentation. So thank you, everybody, for joining us and participating in our Chapter 22 and Chapter 46 2025 regulation meetings that will be proposed for the 2026 fishing year.